Welcome. My name is Nick Stern. I'm professor at the London School of Economics, and we're here to talk about net zero and SMEs, small and medium enterprises. I hope we know why net zero by 2050. That's one of the key necessary conditions for holding to 1.5, and 1.5 is one of the key necessary conditions for our children and grandchildren to live in a world that's manageable. So we have to do it, but what we want to focus on today is not that we have to do it, we hope that that's understood, but what are the mechanisms of getting there, and particularly to focus on the big opportunities involved in doing things differently. Cleaner, more efficiently, cities where you can move and breathe, ecosystems which are robust and fruitful. If we get this right, it's a tremendously attractive, very different story. But we have to invest to get there. It doesn't just happen. And we have to invest in key parts of the economy, right across the economy, to make it happen. So SMEs are everywhere. They're a huge part of our economy, maybe 50% of output and 60% of employment, around 30% of emissions. Net zero means net zero. That means, since the negatives are not going to be very big, it means net zero everywhere, and that means, of course, SMEs. But it's not just something that they have to do, it's something that, because they do, we all do, but it's something that's full of opportunity, and what we want to try to focus on today, the nature of the opportunities and how to make them happen. Now, everyone on this panel is deeply involved in this story. So let me introduce Alison. I'll just go down the line, if I may. So Alison Rose is the Chief Executive of the NatWest. Kwasi Kwarteng is the Secretary of State at BEIS, and right at the heart of the story of net zero and the location of the net zero strategy, for example, that came out just now. And then Catherine Lewis Latour, who is the Chief Executive of the British Business Bank, again at the heart of the finance story, and Claire Barclay, who's the Chief Executive of Microsoft. And of course, Microsoft are everywhere, including with the SMEs. They've all been working on this. NatWest has just published Springboard to Sustainability. British Business Bank has been closely involved, and Microsoft, of course, lives it all the time with the SMEs. So you couldn't have a better panel, and we're going to proceed by asking a few questions. And we're going to go through, I've been given questions, I'm going to do my duty, I might deviate just a little bit occasionally, but I am going to go through the questions as they were set out. There are three themes, good themes. The first one is to identify the opportunity, or from obligation to opportunity. The second set of questions is, well, what's it like being an SME? You know, I mean, I'm a university teacher. I enjoy my life, but it's not an SME. I don't live in one. I interact with one. You all interact with SMEs all the time. You know, and NatWest could hardly be described as an SME. So you have to put yourself in that position to try to understand, and that will be the second theme. And then the last one is the practicality. How do you get it done? You know, if you're going to recast your house in some way or another, you know, you're going to need the energy company and the builders and the bank and the local authorities, and it's endless telephone calls and people who don't answer. And how do you make it all happen? And the practicalities of doing it, which are going to be so important, particularly, of course, to the consumers who are working with the SMEs. So that's the story, and I've got 3 themes, 4 questions, so we have to go fast. So the first question, Alison, NatWest recently published its report, Springboard to Sustainability. Those of in the room will see bits of it on screens. And you announced a new 100 billion funding target by 2025. Could you explain your logic or your reasoning that got you there?
Sure, thank you, Nick. Well, as you stated, SMEs are the lifeblood of a thriving economy, and they represent 50% of the revenue, 60% of the employees, and around 30% of the emissions of the UK. So as we're all grappling with the challenge of climate change and getting to a net zero, unless the SMEs are involved in that discussion, and at the moment a lot of the discussion is around, how we move the global economy and 1.5 degrees, but practically we need to help SMEs deliver that. But there's also an enormous opportunity. So the report and the research that we published in conjunction with a lot of help from everyone else identified a real opportunity. If you're going to build sustainable supply chains, sustainable businesses, we think for SMEs there is a 160 billion revenue opportunity. There's the opportunity to create 130,000 new jobs. So when we're talking about this transition that we need to make, and it really is a transition, and I'm sure we'll come back to that point, SMEs have a really critical role to play because they are in the supply chain of everything we do. And therefore, they can contribute enormously to the reduction in emissions, but also enormously to new businesses, new opportunities. So that's why it's so critical. We're the largest bank to business in the UK. SMEs, we have relationship managers up and down the country and dedicated support. And what we want to do is move from, this really difficult challenge of net zero into practical support. So the 100 billion commitment that we've made is 100 billion pounds of climate sustainable financing and funding that we're going to commit to support the transition. We originally set a target of 20 billion over 3 years, and it was fully deployed in 18 months. So it shows you the demand is there. It shows you the business opportunity is there. So we are really focused on how do we practically help fund, finance the transition, and put support into SMEs to give them the information, the tools, and the help to be able to make good business decisions that are going to build long-term value for them and the opportunity it presents.
Thank you very much, and well done. You're on the way. Now, the next question is for Claire. Now, it's clear that this story has to be one of innovation, and you live the innovation story. But at the same time, we know that some SMEs are really creative and drivers, and there's quite a long tail of those who are not. And part of the British low productivity story in some parts of the economy is that long tail in SMEs. So they're all very different. Innovation is at the heart of the whole story. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I think there are, one of the things I think that's inspired me the most this week, I've had the chance to meet with many SMEs that are here, many businesses that are here, is this is not just an innovation story from a company like Microsoft. This is actually what everyone can do together. So I think the importance of partnerships with businesses, partnerships with government, partnerships and learning from some of the innovative companies that are driving some really clever breakthroughs actually in what's going to need to be done. Because I think if we look at the innovation that's available today, we know in order to meet the net zero targets that there's going to have to be significant breakthroughs in carbon reduction, carbon removal in order to make the progress that we need to make. So I think that the opportunity that Microsoft has is actually providing, together with other businesses and government, opportunities for some of these SMEs to thrive and flourish. And there's been some wonderful examples of that here this week. So I was at the Earthshot event yesterday as an example, and one of the companies that really inspired me there was a company called Climeworks. And they're doing some very clever work on what they're going to take to remove carbon from the atmosphere and put that underground. And they were inspired by the investment that they're getting. They said that one of the barriers that they had was both technological but also financing. So if you think about this combination of finance and innovation, companies like that are going to really provide some breakthroughs, even for companies like us, in terms of the ways that we're partnering together. We've invested quite heavily, I think, in this startup space to kind of think about, well, where is the future innovation going to come from? And obviously providing a lot of technology and tools in order to help them to do that. If you think about the problems that we have of people measuring, and you talk about the challenges of many SMEs not knowing where to start, Alison made reference to the fact it's 30% of the emissions that we have in the UK. And so they need to know how to start measuring where they're at, and this is going to be important for actually taking action. Pledges are one thing, but we need companies to take action. So we've been investing quite heavily in some of the startups around data and AI in particular, because that's going to be at the heart of the measurement side of things. I'll give you one example of a company that we've worked with, which is a company called RecycleEye. And the job that they do is actually using AI and machine learning to sort waste out. So imagine originally there would have been rubbish on a waistline that would have been manually picked, and now there is sort of AI automation that can actually sort the rubbish out, which is leading to much less rubbish going to landfills, as an example. And that is kind of innovation in a company that's just received significant finance investment for further expansion and growth. And so those are just two examples of companies that are really inspiring me about things that can make some positive action.
Now, there's obviously wonderful creativity out there. We'll come back perhaps on the third question to the other end of the creativity distribution and how you really, reach the parts that are rather difficult to reach. I don't want to make beer analogies at this point. Catherine now, your remit is you've got a very broad remit. Obviously, a British business bank is British business, but you've got the remit around SMEs and, of course, net zero. So in your work, how do you see the importance and what the SMEs can do to get to net zero?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the first thing to say is, of course, SMEs are 50% of all business emissions. So there's no net zero without our SMEs. And I think what we've discovered is that the SMEs collectively haven't really had a voice in this debate. And what we'd like to do is be some central place where that voice can be heard. And there are many challenges, of course, as well as opportunities for SMEs as they embark on this journey. And we want to be there as a positive force to help them do that. We think there are two strands. There's definitely a finance piece, and in a piece of research that we did, we know that there's a receptivity to take on external finance to fund greener business models. So there's definitely a finance opportunity there for the financial sector as well as for the SMEs in improving their businesses. But there's also an awareness piece and a demand building piece that we also think that we can work on. Because what we also found from our research is that whilst half of the SMEs surveyed already had a plan in place, the other half were yet to embark on any sort of action around net zero. So just being a place where we can be providing information that will be useful, digestible, clear and targeted for SMEs, we think is a valuable role that we can play. The last thing I'll say in terms of our remit, the British Business Bank was set up in 2014, really in response to the financial crisis. And our role was to make finance markets work better for smaller businesses, again, recognizing the importance of SMEs in the economy. But I have to say that this gentleman here started a very good debate within the bank as to whether we should be revising our own mission, given that climate change is the challenge of our generation and the next generation and those to come. So what we did was we updated our mission to put the transition to net zero at the heart of it in order to drive sustainable growth and prosperity across the UK. And just having that focus now for all of our activities within the bank, I think will make a tremendous difference.
Thank you. Now, Kwasi, you've got a wonderful job. You are at the heart of transforming, not one bit, not the other bit, the whole of the British economy in the most exciting period of our time. You've got colleagues, of course, involved as well, and it's the whole of society, all of us, who are involved in this. And we've had a very exciting 10-point plan, and very recently the net zero strategy, which, let me say, I thought was really a tremendous piece of work. And how do you see the SMEs fitting in that really big story of transforming the whole economy?
Well, I hope you can all hear me, so I'll use this. I hope you can all hear me. But Catherine's right. I mean, one of the things that, I'll just say a little bit about my personal journey. I mean, I was appointed Minister of State for Energy, as it was, on the 24th of July 2019. And the reason I mentioned that was that only 3 weeks before my appointment, we actually passed the net zero legislation. So this whole debate is obviously been driven partly by the net zero 2050 target, which we legislated for. So as a minister coming in, my first day in the department, we had a legal commitment to net zero. And as Catherine pointed out, the British Business Bank was set up in 2014. So a lot of these institutions that we had to kind of retrofit to make net zero compliant, if you like. Because, when the British Business Bank was set up, net zero wasn't part of the law of the land. So as Energy Minister, you'll remember I spent a lot of time thinking about how we could put net zero at the center of institutions. Luckily for me, I think the mood was very much in that direction. And as a part of that, getting SMEs involved and focused on net zero was in a way the next step. So we had government, we had legislation, obviously the bigger companies were signed up to it. But SMEs, and there were three elements that I want to focus on, and they've been touched on by the panel. I mean, firstly, the supply chain element is crucial. So if you've got a race to zero and you've got FTSE 100 companies that are committed to net zero, there's a knock-on effect in terms of their supply chain, because they only have to reflect, for about 10 seconds on their business to see the impact on the supply chain. So that's quite an important pull in terms of the SME debate and making them more focused on net zero. The second issue, I think, is finance and what Catherine has been talking about. And that's why I think it was really important that we got the British Business Bank and some of our leading banks, high street banks, focused on this. And that's where the education and knowledge, because lots of SMEs come up to me, business owners, say, what can I do to get to net zero? Very few of them say, I don't believe in this net zero nonsense. Very, very few people actually say that now. What they are saying is, how do I get involved? And I think it's our job to try and make people focus on that. And then there's a whole skills piece in terms of the net zero impact on SMEs, because obviously if you want to get a heat pump fitted in, or even just some basic insulation, and we saw this with the Green Homes Grant, you need to have a supply chain that has the skills to deliver on this. And that has a huge impact, again, rather like the supply chain, on SMEs. And we need to up those skills as well.
Wonderful. And it could well be that the challenge which we've had in the UK of the long tail of low productivity in SMEs could actually be a challenge which this whole net zero story allows us to tackle in a strong way by forcing change and building the skills and getting the finance behind it. The next round of questions. We're doing all right for time, but we're going to have to. We've got three lots of questions. Yeah, in the shoes of SMEs was the theme. What's it like to actually try to grapple with these things when you're not an expert, you haven't done it before, there are new kinds of problems, you've got energy and creativity, but this is new and you've got to try to work it out. So Catherine first. So your experience in supporting SMEs is now a long one, and you've seen and lived with the barriers and incentives, both, they're both there, the obstacles and the incentives to moving. What's your take on how those obstacles can be overcome, how the incentives can be put in place?
I mean, I think the first thing to say with regard to the SME community, and remember we're talking about 6 million enterprises with very different business models in very different sectors. And what our research showed when we looked at what they consider the barriers are very difficult to pin down into one or two themes. There are about 20 different types of barriers that were mentioned, and a lot of the barriers were very sector specific or specific to that particular type of business. But the biggest barrier that came up was the cost of transitioning to a greener model, and specifically the upfront costs involved in transitioning. So clearly there's an opportunity there to provide financial products that are targeted towards beating that barrier. And actually, again, at the British Business Bank, access to finance is what we're there to improve. So thinking about products that will help allow SMEs to get on that journey is really important. The other big barrier that came up in the research was feasibility, that sense of I don't have this within my control. I'd love to work in a greener environment, but I have a tenancy agreement and it's not my call. So there was a little bit of, what can I concretely do about it? And we think sharing best practice and case studies of what other companies are doing can be really powerful, which we will be doing through our information hub and through events that we'll organise on the ground across the country, just to show the way a little bit in terms of practical actions that can be undertaken. There is lots of low-hanging fruit, and I think many SMEs have undertaken some actions in the low-hanging fruit arena, sort of inserting a smart meter, for instance, but there's a lot more that we can do to show the way. But what we took away from the research was actually more the opportunity here as well, because half of the SMEs surveyed said, actually, we're not sure what our barriers are. So that points to the information deficit, really, that you have, and perhaps they aren't real barriers at all. So again, bringing together the supply and the demand, using multiple tools and multiple approaches to try and get the key messages across is going to be fundamental.
Thank you. And that really flows very nicely into question for you, Alison. When you working with SMEs, they're looking for practical support. Upfront costs are an issue, but it's not just the cost, it's the how to. What's your experience? What are you thinking of taking forward on all this?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think your starting question of being in the shoes of SMEs, it's pretty tough being running an SME at the moment. You're dealing with the pandemic, you're dealing with COVID, you're dealing with the supply chain, you're dealing potentially with inflation issues, all of those different elements. And SMEs don't have huge teams of people like big corporates do to measure what their supply chain is, what their emissions are. And so we need to very quickly get practical. And so, it's about making available the financing, which is the 100 billion, but it's really practical support. We need to move from, a very high level set of information into really practical steps. So that is helping SMEs understand the emissions of their supply chain, pointing them to the financing and the different business choices that they can make to drive sustainability, helping invest in skills and directing them to where they can get the skills and support to do that. And also, entrepreneurs who are developing new green technology, which are going to be something in the future, making that easy. So we're opening up our free accelerators up and down the country. 25% of spaces will be for climate and green sustainable businesses. And that's free support that they get with the right help. So I think we have to address it through all those levels. And then on the cost point, which I think is really important, we need to be able at a global level and a local level and a regional level close this green premium perception and be able to think about the cost differential. And one of the things that I think is really important is we're not going to be able to solve that. SMEs can't solve that individually. Banks can't solve that individually. We're going to need to do it in a really collaborative way. And the reason, let me give an example. So there are lots of, small and medium-sized businesses involved in the agricultural sector. So, and agriculture is super important. It's about 1% of the lending on our balance sheet and about 20 times the emissions. But by working with universities, by working with, the different types of renewable energy, by working with, the wholesalers and the supply chain, by working with the farmers, we can actually come up with solutions to help address that right the way through the supply chain. So we need to recognize that SMEs are in a different position, decipher the barriers, give them the financing, invest in the skills, and work collaboratively to solve that. And I think we've got to move very, very quickly because I agree with you, I think the question of net zero everybody gets, the climate challenge everyone gets. We need to get into the how and to the action and very practical steps for small businesses.
Thank you. I can't resist observing. I'm pretty confident that I'm the oldest person on this panel by some considerable margin. And I come from an era when you actually knew your bank manager, and I actually still know mine, but and you went to ask questions. It wasn't just a financial story. And with internet banking, now for very good reason being so prominent, some of that personal contact, ability to ask questions is gone, I think.
Yeah, I think you can access it in a very different way. So for small business owners, we have business hubs, and actually what business owners really like is the regionality of the information, because regional economies are very different. Access to specialist advice and support, and access to other SMEs who are in the same situation. The peer sharing of best practice is incredibly powerful for small businesses. When you're a large business, you have access to a huge amount of information and research. When you're a small business, actually the best thing to do is sit down with another group of small business owners in the same sector. And actually one of the things that we do is convene that really regularly, really locally, and then bring in the other expertise. Because that is where you can go, well, what are you doing? How are you dealing with this problem? It's not a competitive sport. Good advice, and how are you dealing with it? And so actually, I think technology and digital skills and internet banking or AI and all those things actually make that information more accessible, more digestible, and more easily available to small businesses. So I think it's the marriage of all of those and the peer-to-peer and regional input that really makes a difference.
And the strong sense of community must be a key part of this story.
It hugely is, and one of the things I would say, when you look at what we've been, businesses and small businesses have been through as part of the global pandemic and the pandemic here, you have seen incredible resilience and entrepreneurship from small businesses. Your point about productivity, we've seen small businesses become much more productive. Adoption of digital skills and innovation has been much stronger, and their ability to evolve their business model in really extreme circumstances has been incredible. And I think we underestimate the resilience and the capacity of small businesses. And this is another crisis we need to deal with, but we need to help everyone deal with it.
Very, very good. Thank you, Alison. Now, Claire, you're in the information technology business. So, how do you help understand, all of us understand, and SMEs themselves understand what's possible and deal with the barriers that they come across?
Yeah, it's interesting listening to some of the other commentators, but I do think how you get from there isn't a barrier in a way to companies wanting to do it. It's about what it is they do. So an interesting point on our website, where we have details of sustainability, the most commonly asked question is, how do I build a sustainability plan? It's a very simple question that gets asked. So I think that shows there's a significant level of interest for what do I do next, but they don't quite know what to do. And I think, Catherine, your point around, I don't know what my barriers are. So I think trying to get to practical, and I do think, Kwasi, you talked about supply chain. I mean, I think that's a super important point. If I think of Microsoft and our global supply chain, if I give some statistics for the UK, we have, for businesses, obviously we're dealing with millions of businesses in the UK, a lot of which are small businesses. But if I think of the ecosystem for tech companies, we have 25,000 technology companies that work in and around Microsoft. That's 1 in 10 VAT registered companies. And we've been working with them that says, look, if you kind of understand what the meaning of net zero is, and just make sure they understand all the basics of that, then the point I made earlier on that says, well, where are you starting? How are you measuring? But I think if you think of the challenges that many small businesses have been facing, pandemic, Brexit, COVID, what is it that they've got to do? They've got a lot of challenges that they're dealing with. And so the creation of market opportunities, I think, is a really important one. Obviously, finance comes very closely into that. But if I think about many of the customers, smaller customers I'm working with, it's about how can they see market opportunity on the back of their own race to net zero, but actually what are they doing to kind of reposition their business? I agree, Alison, with your point about resiliency. I've seen incredible innovation and resiliency from many of those smaller companies where they're seizing opportunity. A lot of digitization has happened during that time as well. But they have to think, well, what am I going to do in order to do that? they're going to face some barriers, I think, around the following. They're going to face barriers around what technology is going to be able to help them do that, and hopefully companies like us can help a little bit there. They're also going to face some challenges, I think, around skills. We're seeing, through work that we do in terms of looking at skills that are being sought after. There's two really hot areas at the moment. One of them is cybersecurity, and the other is green skills. And I expect that to be a growing trend. You've got the sort of greening of jobs, so existing jobs that are kind of having a green element added to them, and then you've got specialists on sustainability that are going to be in significantly short supply. So I think that the work that all of us can do to helping with the raising of skills across the regions, I think, is going to be really important. And then the final thing I would say from a Microsoft standpoint, we've been sort of on our own sustainability journey. Probably we announced our first sustainability goals in 2012. And I think we got really serious about it about 2 years ago, where we made our own net zero commitment by 2030. And then we also stated that by 2050, we would remove all of the carbon emissions that we have made since Microsoft was founded in 1975. So we set a goal like that because in order to remove it, we've got to drive the innovation in order to do that. So the last couple of years, we've spent quite a lot of time learning, sharing, publicizing. We did a full audit report of all of our supply chain, and we've published all of that publicly, the things that work, the things that don't work, the things we spent money on that had an impact, etc. And those are the things that many of our customers find really helpful for, that could be quite helpful, whether they're trying to sell to Microsoft or whether they're working with us in their go-to-market. And that was why we also put a $1 billion climate investment fund that said, look, again, like the ideas I talked about earlier on, we're looking for ideas that are going to help us meet that removal target, which I think will be really important. But hopefully, I think for the small businesses out there, if they're in the supply chain of a big company like Microsoft, then they can learn from the things we do, and we hope that we will be able to create new market opportunities for them as they think about their growth and prosperity.
Thank you very much. Now, Kwasi, I promise you go first in the next and final round. But just on this end of this second round, what can the government do to help with the sort of the nitty gritty of the obstacles at the very small level?
I think it's very interesting to hear what Claire was saying about skills, because actually I think this is something which this government, can really help with. One of the things I did this year was this summer, actually, BEIS did what I called a national audit of skills. So, and some really interesting information about where the gaps are. We spoke to all the companies, we speak to a whole range of other companies, large ones and smaller ones. And there were two areas which you've identified, particularly regarding digital skills. So it was more broader than just cyber, but digital skills. And that's something that we, as a government, working across different departments, particularly DCMS and education, really want to focus on. And the second area was these green skills. So, as you say, existing jobs. So you might be a plumber, or you might be a contractor, construction worker. But actually layering green skills on top of your existing skills is a real challenge. And we saw that with things like the Green Homes Grant, which was, we tried to get up and running very, very quickly. But we found that, again, this issue of supply chain, the skills deficit, meant that it was very challenging to implement it, and we need to refine that. So in terms of dealing with skills and the human capital, if you like, if I can use that phrase, of our workforce, that's an area where government uniquely can provide support. It's not the job of NatWest to ensure that we have a properly skilled workforce. That's a government responsibility.
Thank you.
I have to say that it's a very odd, luxurious feeling not to have to answer every question. As a parliamentarian, I'm just geared automatically.
That's right.
Almost like a Pavlovian response to answer all the questions. But it's a real indulgence this morning.
Your self-control has been exemplary, and I hope you're enjoying yourself. Now that the final round, we'll have to move a bit fast because we've got a hard stop at 10:15, and it's about 10:04. So if we could be fairly rapid on this one, because I do want to also give you, a half a minute each for a last word, if we possibly can. So if you could keep these, they're big questions, but keep them short. People worry about risk about where policy is going, risk about where the economy is going, the risks involved in taking loans and making investments. And certainty isn't on offer to any of us, but we can reduce uncertainty. So, Kwasi, what can the government do to help with, generating the confidence that people need to make these major changes?
So I see one of my predecessors as Energy Minister, Nick Hurd, back here.
Hello, Nick.
I just want to say hi to Nick. I mean, you kick-started a lot of the things that we're doing, so it's great to see you.
Okay, you're supposed to be encouraging.
You got me out of jail. No, it's a very, very good question. No, in terms of de-risking or reducing uncertainty, there are a number of things that we have done that we are continuing to do that will do that. I think the legislation, the net zero legislation, really clarified what the strategic objective was. But within that, and you mentioned that, we have the 10-point plan, we've got the energy white paper, we've got the hydrogen strategy, we've got the net zero strategy itself. Now, those strategies don't answer all the questions, but they do give what I call tram lines and a sense of direction. And I can say, having done this job for, as Minister of State and now in my current job for 2.5 years, I think the strategies, the energy white paper, all those policy documents have been really helpful in letting people know what the direction of travel is. And I think the private sector, particularly notably at this COP, has been engaged in a way that I've never seen before. And I think that is helped by the fact that the government is consistently quite clear about the direction. We haven't got all the answers, but we have set a fairly clear, I think, direction on where we're going. And I think that's a big responsibility of government. That does reduce, gives more clarity and reduces uncertainty.
I must say, I think that is enormously important. And I've been to all the COPs since 2006, and this is the first one where business has been right out in front, and it's of enormous importance. And of course, that's not unrelated to where the government is pointing. That's very. So, Claire, the Microsoft NatWest have got a cut carbon initiative looking at your supply chain. How are these initiatives going to help drive the change?
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep this brief. I think the examples that I gave before around collaboration and partnership, I think the partnership that Microsoft have with NatWest is just a really good example of that, because NatWest are one of the largest lender to SMEs, and Microsoft is clearly a large technology company. So you imagine the opportunity for both companies coming together to make sure that both digitally as well as finance offerings, you're able to kind of record and measure the impact that companies have. And then I think, as Alison has said, make some really tangible steps for the things that they need to do so that they're actually able to kind of get going on this journey to net zero. So we're really excited about the partnership and the extended reach that both companies have together, and look forward to the impact that that's going to drive.
Thank you, Claire. That flows straight into you, Alison. You've spoken about net zero as a team game. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the biggest challenges we're going to face, and we're not going to solve it individually on our own. We're talking about a global rewiring of the economy and building a new economy, and it is an absolute imperative that we do it, and we've got to get on with it. But I think it is by the partnerships we have with companies like Microsoft, with fintechs like Kogo, where we're actually going to solve this together, or coalitions around clean buildings, so that we can think about green cement. Some of the non-sexy stuff, I guess, that we need to really resolve. So I think the positive is the private sector is at the table with the money. What we need to now is work in real collaboration, real partnership to actually affect change. And for those that don't have the information or the skills or the access to finance, we actually roll our sleeves up, get the barriers out of the way and drive that. And I think the 10-point plan that the government has set some clear directions. Net zero is a clear direction, and then we need to work together to solve that. So it's very much a team sport.
Thank you very much, Alison. And Catherine, you're in the middle between the public and the private, and it's a fun place to be, but a crucial place to be. How do you see that position as helping SMEs with the whole practical side of getting things done?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think we are in a pretty unique position, actually, sitting between the public and the private sectors. And I think what we can do to bring back information from our SME communities, and again feed that back into government, hopefully to get better design of policies going forward as they're affecting SMEs is a role that we can play. But we definitely have a role in joining the dots. And we've done that hitherto, actually, in terms of the way that we make our investments in the venture capital sphere. So crowding in private sector capital is going to be a huge part of what we continue to do going forward. We've invested around £500 million so far in companies in green technologies. And the last thing I would say is never underestimate our SME community and the innovation that we have in this country, because it's very powerful.
Thank you very much. Now, a very quick last word to each of you, and then I'll try to spend half a minute drawing one or two things together. I was given the order, I'm not quite sure why, but I'm going to follow my instructions. Claire, Alison, Catherine, and then Kwasi.
So I would say that it is time for action. It's amazing that businesses is here at COP, and we've all got to make it count. So it starts with measuring, so people know where they start, and then you build a plan. And I think that what we can achieve together, I think, is where partnership's going to be really important.
Thank you, Alison.
Well, I think echo all of that. SMEs are the heart of this transition. They are the liquid life force of the economy, and they have a really important role to play in the transition. So working in partnership, working in collaboration, and supporting SMEs, both with financing and skills and support, will make a huge difference. 30% of the emissions of the UK economy. But job opportunity, job creation, revenue opportunity, they are absolutely critical. And so our focus must be and should be on supporting our SMEs to get to net zero.
Thank you. Catherine.
I would just say engagement with the SME community, thinking about the rich and complex societies and companies that we have in the country is how we should start. Some SMEs might be, totally terrified by thinking about measurement, but you get them over that. So start the engagement, give them the tools, give them the places to go to get information, finance, advice, and we'll all be on this journey together.
Thank you, Kwasi.
Great. I just wanted to say a few words about the transition. Because, as Alison said, this is a whole economy. This is a global challenge. And the only way that governments, particularly in democratic countries, are going to actually deliver on this is by bringing people along with us. And I think about my constituency. SMEs dominate the economic life of Spelthorne, which is the seat I represent. So in order to really connect with them, we have to sell net zero to them. There's no choice. There's no alternative to that. And I would say at this COP, we've done, I think, a good job in trying to connect with them, and for two reasons. Firstly, as you say, we're bringing in the private sector right in the center of this story. And hitherto, 15, 20 years ago, it was very much a government-to-government conversation. Whereas now, galvanizing the private sector, I think SMEs are really a part of that, which is crucial. The other thing that we've done effectively at this COP, I think, is look at a sectoral, sector-by-sector approach, which was outlined in the net zero strategy. And that's a very effective way when Alison talks about agriculture being 1% of her book in terms of loans, but 20% of the emissions. That's a really helpful way of thinking about the nature of the problem. And I think once you take this sectoral approach in terms of power generation, in terms of buildings, in terms of transport, I think that's, again, a way in which you can address this issue in terms of the SMEs and the business community. So there's progress being made, still a huge way to go. But I'm really pleased that the sectoral approach and talking about finance and private enterprise is a really good way of hooking in SMEs. And I think we're doing that at this COP.
Thank you. And we're almost at the end, but let me just try to pull out some of the themes. First was the enormous sense of opportunity, and that in order for those opportunities to be taken, there has to be strong, active, but cheerful and positive engagement. That's the first part. The second, I think, was around data, information, understanding what you're doing. We measure output and employment, and then we think of, well, what else should we say? Well, there's also emissions now, as you made very clear in the agricultural point. So those should be, it should be in the first 2 or 3 things we say about a sector and a whole activity. And with the information that lies underneath that, and all of you involved, all 4 of you involved in that information business in one way or another. Skills came through very strongly. And if you have an excitement about learning new skills that we all have to do, then that's something that people can do together and fire each other up. It's sort of a collective endeavor, embarking on a new road. And it may be that story could help drive up productivity right through the activities of the SMEs, including, of course, the extra productivity associated with energy efficiency and all of that. And lastly, of course, is finance. But finance delivered in a way that from people who want to help you do things, understand your problems, and drive forward in what is the most fundamental change that any of us will have seen. But it's full of opportunity and full of excitement, and we absolutely have to get there. And thanks to all 4 of you for your great leadership in your complementary and team ways of getting these things done. Thank you very much indeed.